Long before Hitler came to power, he wrote in Mein Kampf that Russia represents living space, Lebensraum, for Germany. Just suppose that an astute German foreign policy had taken over the role of Japan in 1904. And we can scarcely measure the consequences this would have had for Germany. There would never have been any World War. The bloodshed in the year 1904 would have saved 10 times as much in the years 1914 to 1918. If land was desired in Europe, it could be obtained only at the expense of Russia. This meant that the new Reich must again set itself on the march along the path of the Teutonic Knights of old. Did you catch that? Only at the expense of Russia. That is elementary geography, that's all. If the Germans had decided to make war on Russia, and not the USSR, they would have put into operation their so-called General Plan Ost. That is a terrible document. By the outbreak of World War II, General Plan Ost foresaw mainly handing over new lands to large landowners. Hitler wrote, "We stop the endless German movement to the south and west and turn our gaze toward the land in the east." Big business only wants to grow bigger. That is its raison d'être, and as they say, it's nothing personal. In a decree of October 7, 1939, Hitler authorized Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer of the SS and head of the Gestapo, to implement General Plan Ost, and he appointed Himmler to lead the Reich Commission for the strengthening of Germandom. Himmler then became head of general planning for the regions of Eastern Europe. General Plan Ost was not a single document, but a series of consecutive actions that were carried out step by step as the Germans moved east. In May 1940, the Reichskommissar's staff drew up a document on colonization of the East, namely in the territory of occupied Poland. As Reinhard Heydrich, chief of the Reich Main Security Office, stated, "The first step shall be to create a protectorate from the provinces of Danzig, West Prussia, and Warthegau. As of last year, these provinces, as well as East Prussia and the Silesian portion, still had a population of 8 million Poles. These lands shall be gradually settled by Germans. The Polish element must be eradicated step by step. These lands shall in time become fully German." A governorate was set up over 4 Polish provinces, and German law was in force. Later, already in 1941, it incorporated also the province of Eastern Galicia, with its capital in Lviv. The Nazis didn't care what anyone had to say about this, even the puppet Polish government. Most local people found their rights restricted. The only universal right they enjoyed was to labor for the Third Reich. On May 28, 1942, Himmler received a memo entitled General Plan Ost, Legal, Economic, and Spatial Foundations of the East. It came from Konrad Meyer, a professor at Berlin University and a senior SS official. The memo was signed by some 30 men of letters. Contributing to General Plan Ost were agricultural scientists, economists, and other experts from the academic world. Esteemed men, smart minds. All in all, the annexed Polish provinces, as Professor Meyer suggested, should have a population of 4.5 million Germans, which would require, and we quote, evicting in trainload after trainload over 3 million racially undesirable Poles. The children were to be sorted in terms of racial purity, and those suitable for Germanization were to be sent to Germany. A total of 200,000 Polish children were taken away. They were brought up as Germans and Nazis in orphanages belonging to the Lebensborn Project, which means font of life. This name is appalling, font of life. It was just like these cannibals to assign such a pathetic and poignant name to their institutions. In the course of a long series of deportations of the Jewish and Polish populations from Western Poland, only 12,000 Jews survived out of a previous 435,000. The total number of deported Poles is today estimated at 365,000 people. 365,000 Poles were taken to who knows where, probably to be reduced to mere ashes. And so they did live to see bad old Stalin come to liberate them. The Poles, who to this day cannot forgive Stalin for freeing them in so bad a way, would, under other circumstances, not have been able to get so emotional about this. They simply wouldn't be here at all, but reduced instead to ashes. In June 1942, Himmler ordered Meyer to expand the plan beyond the Eastern and Slavic territories so that it would encompass also the full Germanization of Estonia and Latvia in the shortest possible time. While Latvia was welcoming the visitors from Germany and showing off their national dress, the Nazis were methodically planning what they should use the Germanized locals for. General Plan Ost spoke directly about this. When managing the massive territories falling under the German Empire, our approach should be to save the German people's effort as much as possible. Thus, the measures odious to the Russian population, for example, will be called out not by a German, but by a Latvian or Estonian under our administration. That is, those local people were assigned the role of executioners. As Hitler explained, regardless of what local individual units might think, the local population should not be educated or cared for. The same local population which remained after the war. In Latvia during the war years, 46 prisons were built, 23 concentration camps, and 18 Jewish ghettos. In these, 313,798 peaceful civilians were exterminated, of which 39,835 were children, including Latvian children. Yes, this is the same Latvia where former SS liked to parade, where a March 16th event commemorates the fallen volunteers of the Latvian SS Legion, and this was even, take note, a state holiday for several years. Even today, these commemorations are indulged by the local authorities. Within Lithuania, the Memel-Narif region was formed. The local crowd naturally had no idea of what the Nazis planned to do with them. Concerning the Lithuanians, whose overall racial data are significantly worse than those of the Estonians and Latvians, some thought should be given to providing them with territory in the east, suitable for colonization. By 1942, 17,000 Germans had already migrated to Lithuania in search of, and I quote, better living conditions. That is, 17,000 mainly Lithuanian citizens had to make way for a supposedly more civilized nation. And those 17,000, sadly, are no longer able to honor the memory of the Lithuanian Nazis who began on June 23, 1941, to attack Soviet soldiers and to commit murder and pogroms. Already in early 1941, Himmler told his 12 SS section heads that the goal of the Russian campaign was to liquidate 30 million Slavs. Do you understand the magnitude of this? Not 3 Slavs, not 30, but 30 million. They were talking about you and me. Reinhard Heydrich, chief of the Reich Main Security Office, said, "The approach to these lands is like building dams and draining coastline. Far to the east, a protective dike is being built, which will protect these lands from the Asiatic storms. And from the west, these lands are gradually being joined to the Reich. How would such a life look from a bird's eye view, say from the height that a German eagle flies? Some remarks of Hitler's made on October 17, 1941, have come down to us. Where the big rivers are crossed, German cities must arise as centers of the Wehrmacht, police, administration, and party authorities. Along these roads will be German farmsteads, and soon the monotonous steppe, with its Asiatic appearance, will look very different indeed. In 10 years, 4 million Germans will have settled there, and in 20 years, at least 10 million. They will come not only from the Reich, but above all from America, and from Scandinavia, Holland, and Flanders too. And the rest of Europe shall play its part in this opening up of the Russian expanses as well. In 1943, not far from Himmler's headquarters in Żytomir, the German settlement of Hegewald was founded. 15,000 Ukrainians had been driven from their homes to make way for 10,000 Germans. Professor Meyer visited for his work not only Western Poland, but also Żytomir in the Crimea, in order to determine how his plans could be carried out here. The Nazis had special designs for Crimea. They pointed to German historians who claimed that the Goths had lived there in the Middle Ages and were moreover the elites of the region. So General Plan Ost's drafters decided to wipe this land clean of any other peoples. Crimea would be named Gotenland, Simferopol would become Gostburg, and Sevastopol would be renamed Theodorichshafen, that is, the port of Theodoric, the Ostrogoth king who sacked Rome. Some representatives of the Crimean Tatars who live in Kiev today and continually fuel a hysteria about the genocide of their people should nevertheless keep in mind that, under other circumstances, this would not even be a matter for discussion. Hitler was quite specific on this point. The local people, we must carefully sort them. We will remove the destructive Jewish element entirely. Reinhard Heydrich, chief of the Reich Main Security Office, stated, "The East and its regions are partially inhabited by Slavs. These are regions where, we must understand, kindness is seen as weakness. There are regions where the Slav himself does not want to be treated as an equal, where he is used to having a master different from himself." You hear that, don't you? Lovers of torchlight processions? Ukraine, which was initially meant to be separated from the rest of Russia only as an interim measure, would be used as a source of food under German control.
Вот освобожденный Донбасс. Обнажите головы, современники великих битв. Это наши дети и жены, отцы и матери. Их убили фашисты. Вот они, гитлеровские мерзавцы. Вот он, позор человечества. Смотрите, ненавидьте, презирайте проклятых убийц наших детей, растлителей наших сестер. Не забывайте и не прощайте ни одной материнской слезы.
We will say it again. Do you hear that, you fools who love to march in rank? You were to be a source of food, nothing more. It is these spaces, Heydrich said, that we must now control and preserve in the East. Spaces in which a German elite must, in accordance with military evolution, be engaged in a form of clear domination. The lands must serve as a deposit of raw materials and its population as laborers. Helots, frankly speaking. Do you know who the Helots were? In ancient Sparta, these were farmers whose position was somewhere between that of serfs and slaves. Don't be fooled by the majestic propaganda shops in this German newsreel. 5 million people were forced to go to Germany for labor. including 2.5 million from Ukraine. Not everyone served kindly masters. A significant portion of them died working for hazardous industries, where the Germans were reluctant to employ racially pure Aryans. As Hitler insisted, every successor to the Führer should know, security for the Reich exists only if there are no foreign military forces west of the Urals. Our iron principle is, and has to remain, we must never permit anybody but the Germans to carry arms. Why have you come up with these ridiculous names for yourselves? Pravый Sector, Azov, and so forth. Better to refer to yourselves as a mere food source, or as slaves for your masters, helots. Did you think that you would be accepted as Spartans? Ha! The German Führer was quite clear on this. We won't assume the role of nursemaids. We have no such obligations. To improve their dwellings, to catch lice, German teachers, newspapers, no. Better we simply open a radio station under our control, and better if they can recognize no more than traffic signs so they cannot run into our cars. And so that the Ukrainians don't get in the Aryans' way, Western Ukraine especially was to be purged of 67% of its local population. Himmler had a very specific plan. I have set a goal for the next 2 decades once the war ends. I can realize it with your help. To move the German border some 500 kilometers to the east. This means that we must resettle farming families there. During the retreat from southern Ukraine in the fall of 1943 alone, some 100,000 German settlers fled in convoys. They were forced to abandon everything they had. That is, 100,000 Germans had already evicted 100,000 Ukrainians, Russians, Greeks, and Jews, and had already begun to settle down. And this happened in the same places where recently a bust of Marshal Zhukov was barbarously torn down. Hitler and Himmler must be celebrating down in hell. On days like this, a Nazi soul must cry out with happiness, "Our cause lives on. We shot these Untermenschen, slaughtered them, burned them, forced them from their homes, and we slept under their feather quilts. And look at how eagerly they smashed that Soviet general's image now. They are capable of doing such things when they really want to." Hitler said it bluntly. For them, the word liberty means the right to wash on holidays. If we arrive bringing soft soap, we'll obtain no sympathy. There's only one task, to set about the Germanization of the land by bringing in Germans, and to regard the indigenous inhabitants as an inferior race. He was seconded in this by Himmler. After the Germanic people's victory, territory for settlement in the East shall be mastered and joined to European culture. Take note of these words, joined to European culture. How often we hear those words today. Everyone wants to keep joining us to European culture, with the right to be used as whipping boys. According to Hitler, Himmler, and their experts, the Russians were the most worthless people from a racial perspective. Their so-called science recognized Russians as the least Germanized people, and moreover, spoiled by the poison of Judeo-Bolshevism for 25 years. Under the Ost Plan, a special priority was the destruction of the largest Soviet cities, first and foremost Leningrad and Stalingrad, as breeding grounds for Bolshevism. Hitler said, "We shall not enter Russia's cities. They are to disappear entirely, and we shall not feel sorry for it afterwards." That is, they were prepared to battle not only people, but architecture, to fight the inhabited Russian territory as such. Those radical right-wing groups, all those restless fighters against the already long-gone Bolsheviks, which only occasionally appear in Russia, including in St. Petersburg today, ought to realize that their marches would otherwise have taken place in wastelands, where even the grass wouldn't know that it grows over the ruins of the Winter Palace and Hermitage. But how would those groups march without arms and legs anyway? They too would have become mere smoke and ashes. The Nazis did not bother inventing any elaborate way of exterminating the Slavs. Rather, all Belarus, a large part of the Russian north and central regions, were cut off from food supplies. Hermann Goering said on May 2, 1941, "Undoubtedly, tens of millions of people will die of starvation if we extract from the country everything that is necessary for us. You don't even have to bother with anything. Just take all the food, and they will die out themselves."
Ограбление нашей страны, захват нашего хлеба, нефти, восстановление власти помещиков и капиталистов.
And there is naturally the extermination of the Jews. Over 500,000 Jews were killed just by roving SS groups. Red Army commissars were shot. All resistance was eliminated, and anyone even suspected of resistance was killed. As Hitler explained, we shall employ and are entitled to employ all necessary measures, executions, and evictions. Today in Russia, and especially in some of our former republics, one periodically hears that if Hitler had defeated the Bolsheviks, he would have given everyone freedom. The Ukrainians, the Baltic people, the Don and Terek Cossacks, the peoples of the Caucasus. Naive fools they are, who do so much harm. For these peoples, a program was drafted to reduce their fertility, cull their population, promote abortion, and deprive them of medical care and education. Hitler wrote, "We shall act as if this territory is under our mandate, and we must be clear, we shall never leave it." Everyone visiting those veterans' marches in Riga and Kiev would have been reduced to the status of slaves. The only thing their masters might have entrusted them with was the murder of a commissar or a Jewish family, the women and children included. They entrusted them with all that until their infernal plans were stopped, and all these beasts were sent running, crawling back to Europe. It must be mentioned the Professor Meyer, or rather Oberführer Meyer, died peacefully in 1973 at the age of 72 as a retired West German academic. How could that be, you might be asking yourselves? Here's how. Yes, he was put on trial along with other SS men in the so-called Race and Settlement Main Office case. However, an American court sentenced them to negligible punishments merely for being SS members. Somehow, all documents relating to the extermination of those foul Slavs were lost, and therefore nothing could be proven, or they did not want to prove anything. Why? Because the Cold War had already begun, and experts like Meyer could come in handy. Meyer was freed in 1948. He ran a seed farm, published several works on plant breeding, overpopulation, and problems of feeding the world. He was an unassuming man, intelligent-looking and dapper. His ideas have taken further shape, and we don't mean his thoughts on plant breeding. No, his other ideas. They have mutated and now don't seem so loathsome. Sometimes they look nearly attractive. European culture, progress, something of that sort. But for God's sake, be careful. Remember what happened back then. General Plan Ost did not relate to some abstract Slavs, Balts, or Crimean Tatars. The Ost Plan related to you, a human being. That's all. Full stop.